Now, the question comes up of what is a building method. In a certain sense, it could be a structural system, but generally, people take a building method as being focused on a wall material, to state it rather simply. A house is extremely complex, and the purpose of this diagram is to remind us of some of the many interactions between house and surrounding environment. These could be places for energy loss, pollution gain, temperature increases, toxic elements being released. Building sort of under attack is one view, but also building, breathing, and connecting to its larger environment is the other side. So this little cartoon that I made is a few of the forces that operate on a building and that affect your building decisions. So in trying to say, well, what is a building system, I'm temporarily skipping the question of just a pure structural method. And there are also various levels ranging from a single product to an entire prefabricated building. Some of you may have seen Dwell magazine as a house that was designed in San Francisco Bay Area called the Glide House. It arrives on a truck in 2 modules, extremely modern, total package. It's the upgrading of the manufactured home. Well, that's a sort of building system, but it involves much more than just the wall material. My perspective on wall material is that it does dominate kind of what your building becomes. The material you choose to work with is extremely influential, but it's not the whole game by any means. And I'm fascinated by all the rest of the information that you have to do to design a place that truly works on all sorts of levels. So design considerations is the general term that I give to the information you take in as a designer. And it includes all sorts of stuff. I have a whole pile of lists that I hope someday to make into an interactive set of checklists that you can go through. It includes the placement of things in the kitchen, the placement of stones outside your house, your responses to color, how you live as a person, whether you want a certain degree of shelter and connection to the environment. All of this stuff comes into play in terms of bringing out all the design considerations. So the dance of design, which I'm not going to get into at the moment, that dance involves somehow weaving together all of those design considerations into a single fabric. I try not to forget that we're doing all this for people, and people are just as unique as their sites. The beginning of an encyclopedia of building methods with regard to wall materials primarily, and there's no way that I can include every conceivable product or material. But what I've done is to sort of look a little bit more broadly than our conventional focus, to expand beyond not just what we see around us here in the Tucson region, but to consider some of the larger kinds of innovations and variations people have done. I like doing this myself from time to time to get reminded of what's outside the box, whatever box I'm working in, and what's beyond that box. So I sorted these into plant-based, soil-based, rock and mineral-based, and allowed plastics for energy efficiency because that's the original green basis for selling certain kinds of products, and has a certain amount of validity, although some of the hardest core natural builders won't touch the question of plastic foam of any kind. It's a startling material, and even soy has made inroads into the foam business. So that there's discussion and debate about all this stuff, but I wanted that as a kind of category to catch a couple of important products that are in use. And finally, I threw in a category for recycled materials. All kinds of oddball houses have been built out of recycled stuff. It probably will not per se make a huge dent in the commercial market, but I'm focusing more on diversity in this collection than I am on what's going to transform the commercial market. We have other wonderful people representing that transformation. So I guess at about 45 seconds a slide, I have to run through these examples. In the case of wood, here are 3 ways to use it. Purely as a timber frame, the upper left is a log house, which we designed and built on Camino Island outside of Seattle. And then as a cordwood wall, which essentially fireplace logs stacked with mortar in between them, has been used in Europe, particularly Denmark, and there are many examples of it in the United States. Straw bale, which I've done quite a lot of work in, but I'm not slavishly devoted to nor a cultist of, as a marvelous medium in which the people in Nebraska, in the upper right, in about 1900, after baling machines had been invented, figured out you could stack them up, plaster them with lime plaster, and there's still some of those houses still in existence. More recently around here, we've had what's been called the straw bale revival, largely thanks to Mats Merman and David Eisenberg, beginning about 15 years ago. This led to straw bale code. If I have a chance and don't slow down too much here, I'll get to a last slide about the codes. The 2 bottom ones are on the right, a relatively normal straw bale wall raising where you can see a post and beam frame being infilled with bales and an X of metal strapping that constitutes a shear panel. The one on the left is a large vault made near Joshua Tree for a composer who unfortunately didn't survive the building process, not because of an accident, but just because he got to the end of the trail before the building was done. It's now a bed and breakfast that you can go to, and his music, his name is Lou Harrison, his music is still played in that vault. Bamboo we see relatively little of, but timber bamboo actually is growable here. There's a site out of Tanque Verde Loop where there's some 4 or 5 inch timber bamboo that's 50 feet tall. It's not in harvestable quantities, but there are people around here quite interested. Kyle Young in Aravaca, for example, may eventually get to a point of harvestable amounts of bamboo, but in the rest of the world, the tropical world particularly, it's a remarkably effective material. In South America, it's also used. I don't have a picture of his work, but Simon Velez has done trusses up to 70 feet out of bamboo. At a somewhat smaller scale, or like small bamboo, you can find in worldwide examples stuff like thatch and sets of poles that are created to lath with or to hold thatch up and to create screen walls. This lower right one, I guess I should be using the dot. Those columns out of bamboo, and that's a school called the Handmade School. It's in Bangladesh. And it has no real protection from the elements because the climate doesn't need it. The rest, it was made without power tools, including by students. It's an interesting story. Then moving from plant materials quickly to earthen materials, adobes are beloved historical material around here, and in a sense is also undergoing a kind of revival. The formulation of adobe has been changed so that there are stabilizing elements. Most prominent are concrete and asphalt, both locally made. And lower left here has a testing situation at University of New Mexico of vaults and domes, but the engineering of those is pretty difficult and hard to get through building departments, but it can be done. Adobes are being made in the foreground on site at a project in Mexico that has a dome in the back and a vault in the front. Upper right is a stabilized adobe project in Tucson, out near the Desert Museum. And I show it because it's an example of locally produced material. Clay mine adobe is about 3 miles from this site. So it's a relatively short trip from where Eric Johnson digs into the ground, casts his block, sets them into his house. The upper right one is a temple in Mali where they've made remarkable sculptural uses of adobe.